All right, you guys. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our live stream. I'm so excited to be here. We were gone a few weeks just with summer and everything and getting kids back to school. I know you guys were really tied up. So it's so nice to be back here to discuss our quote unquote weekly live stream topic. Today, and I'm just to introduce you guys again, if you haven't seen this before, I'm with Ned and Kelly Vandiver. They are wonderful relationship coaches who work with me inside the 5-to-1 Couples Cure. And we get together periodically to discuss the biggest barriers to healthy, authentic relationships. And this week, we're going to be talking about a super important topic, which is, and it's one of the biggest complaints that we get actually, which is misunderstanding, feeling misunderstood by your spouse. This comes up all the time, no matter what the dynamics are, whether you're a high conflict couple or the kind of couple that's totally avoidant. Misunderstandings are really at the root of most major problems, emotional disconnection and active fighting and high conflict and getting out of that ratio of positive to negative. So today what we're going to do is we're going to really explore this a little bit, what misunderstandings truly are, and how you can set yourself up to be truly heard and seen and understood, so that you can really have a healthy, authentic relationship and nip in the bud these things that are nagging at you, because it's one of these things that happens sort of under the surface, and a lot of times it's hard to identify. This isn't actually a communication problem. If we actually understood what the other person was saying, we know how to communicate. It's just that we're not really understanding what the other person is saying. That It can be very sneaky that way. So just real briefly before we get into it, feeling misunderstood, like I want to kind of define it briefly for you guys. I characterize it as really the ultimate emotional disconnection. And it sets you up you enter into really dangerous emotional territory, because if you're misunderstood or if you feel misunderstood, that erodes trust, right? It sets up negative expectations, and it can be really scary. It can feel really emotionally unsafe. We need to know that our spouse gets us to feel safe. And the vast majority of conflict in marriage is based on misunderstanding. And I think you guys even said it was like 90% of problems in marriage come from misunderstanding. And this is alarming because divorce starts in the mind. And misunderstanding is the root cause of divorce. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about what really creates misunderstandings in a global sense, kind of what's at the root of that. Then we'll talk about really specific ways that misunderstandings show up in our dynamics. It can show up differently depending on your dynamic. And then most importantly, how you can set yourself up to really hear each other in spite of your differences. The most important thing to remember, I think, the biggest takeaway is that when we get really intentional about taking the time to truly understand each other, we have a much stronger communication. It's almost like the immune system of our relationship gets really strong when we know that we can trust, we understand what they're saying, and they understand what we're saying. If you don't have that, it's really hard to have anything, of substance, anything that you can really count on. So you guys, what would you say? I mean, I know this comes up all the time in our work with clients. What would you identify as the most common way that you see people really getting it wrong, and misunderstanding each other?
Yeah. So at the core of all of it, and both, I want to say that both women and men want to feel understood, by their partners.
Yeah.
It's not just women, who want to feel seen and understood. Men really want to feel understood also.
Everybody needs that.
Yeah. The core issue that we find is that most people, and I'm speaking from experience, have from childhood some people have a really orphaned spirit, like they've been abandoned, they've been ignored since childhood. It really depends on kind of your placement within, your family of origin. Some people have a lot of trauma, and abuse is really on a spectrum. But everyone has experienced some kind of abuse because there are various forms. It's not just being beaten the crap out of. And our parents give us what they have. They love us ultimately, and they do the best they can. but most times it's not good enough. And so then what you end up with, what we see, is a person who feels deeply inadequate, who feels in fear of being judged at every turn and very on guard. And when you have these kinds of dynamics going on with inside an individual, you learn from a young age that you only have yourself to rely on, you know, and you learn from a really young age that you can't trust, you know, outside of just yourself. You don't know how to ask for help when you need it. You don't know how to express your needs, your feelings, because your needs weren't met, right? So you just don't know how to do this stuff. And if you're a person who's not doing the inner work, then what happens is after sort of that honeymoon chemical phase of the relationship wears off, whenever that inner pain starts rising up within you from your early childhood and the neglect, the trauma, whatever, you're going to look at your partner for the reason for why you're feeling the pain when they're not the reason, you know. But they are the antidote if you're with the right person. And, you know, that's a whole other conversation. But, you know, and at that point, you're going to start to, again, you're going to get into the blame game. You're going to turn to the misery stabilizers. You're going to turn to the losing strategies of being in a relationship. So that's the core reason for why we see so much misunderstanding is just the pain not being dealt with, and the inner work just not being done. And it's really the cause of all the misunderstanding.
Right. So if you have a template of experience of I'm not going to be seen or heard, or I'm not going to be really validated, and it really doesn't speak to, like you said, Kelly, it's not about the intentions of our parents. And even like I think of friends of mine who grew up in really great, stable homes where there was no abuse, there was no like trauma, there was no overt trauma, but there wasn't enough of a modeling of how do I deal with conflict, or what does it mean to have conflict. So the meaning attached to having a conflict in that family, this is just an example, a specific example, is, oh my gosh, everything must be totally horrible. If we're having a disagreement about something, that must mean everything that I believe is true is now being called into question, because it's just outside of their experience. So whatever your experience is, even if you had a great, you know, you remember, I remember my parents being really loving, and I remember having really great things. No matter who you are, usually there's always some wound of childhood. But even if you can't access that, I think what is important to remember is that we all have a perceptual filter that we bring with us and unconscious expectations, so that when we hear something, we might assume, oh, that's what that means. It's really, misunderstandings are about the meaning that we attach something.
Exactly.
Attached to something that may or may not be true. It might not at all be what our spouse meant, but from our life experience, that's what we're assuming it means.
Right.
Yeah.
And we don't even get to that. We just operate from that assumption, and then it goes south, and people can't figure out like what just went wrong right now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I actually want to speak to that orphan spirit that Kelly actually talked about as it relates to men, though. You know, you couple that with, you know, the old modeling, you know, of, you know, what a man is supposed to look like and be like. And when I speak of orphan, you know, oftentimes the men are orphaned from themselves. And what I mean by that, when you detach yourself emotionally, you know, from one of the more natural parts of you, which are your emotions, you are separating yourself from yourself. And in doing so, you also create this barrier between relationship, period. You understand what I'm saying? So a lot of times I hear this from women who are doing some work. They can't get, you know, the men aboard, or can't quite get them to make the turn to identify with the changes that, you know, how they're showing up, and kind of getting them to recognize that. And so I just wanted to say that because I know a lot of women are dealing with that, but I wanted to bring some clarity to why a lot of times the men are responding in the way that they're responding. And a lot of times we seem to be a lot more slow and going and picking up on some of the nuances of the changes that, you know, where someone is actually doing the work. because because of that barrier that we have,
That's such a good point. And I think if you've been raised to like not really be in touch with your emotions, or if you've been raised to feel like I need to just muscle through and just stay in the world of, the logical mindset, move right into problem solving. This is a great example. This is a specific way that a misunderstanding can show up.
Exactly.
Is let's say we have, and this is gendered mostly, but it can work the other way. This is not fixed. But a lot of times it will be the wife will want to bring up an emotion or talk about her emotional experience, and the husband will want to move into fixing. And they end up getting into an argument about it because there's a misunderstanding, because her intention is, I want to feel heard. I want you to empathize. I want you just to be like, God, that sucks. You want to be joined in the emotional experience. And his, area of competency and what he was taught to do is, I'll fix it. I will take that and we'll go right to, well, what are we going to do about it?
Right.
And here's how we can fix it. Here's how we can take away your feelings. She thinks, well, you don't even want me to have my feelings. You just want to give me a reason to not have my feelings. And I just want to have my feelings. So the misunderstanding is, he doesn't care. He doesn't want to help me. And he's thinking, well, what are you talking about? I am helping you. I'm sitting here trying to fix it for you, because I love you. And so there's this misunderstanding of ill intentions. He feels misunderstood, and she does too. So the gender thing really comes up, I think, a lot. But regardless of if it's a gender thing, there's always just a cross-cultural experience when we get married, right? We have our own filters. We have our own understanding of what certain things mean.
Yeah.
Right? How many of us have been raised in a family where there's subtext? You say one thing and you know what that really means, but then you marry someone who's not schooled on that, and then they're not operating from that subtext, and then you have misunderstandings because there's an unspoken assumption underneath it. That's another way I think that shows up.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Do you have any examples of that in working with anybody recently where that either they're not being direct, or they're making different meaning out of what their spouse said?
I see that all the time. I mean, all the time with clients, especially with women, where instead of being really direct, and with men especially, well, with anyone, not just men, with everyone, because everything is energy, and what is behind your words and the intention and the energy behind your words matters. And so if you want someone to be direct and transparent with you, you have to be direct and transparent with them, because boomerang effect, right? Like everything you put out is going to come right back at you. It's a law. And so a lot of times I see with women, instead of just being direct and saying, hey, this is what I want, they'll say some other confusing thing, like beating around the bush and going in this really confusing circle, instead of just being really direct with it and just saying it.
Yeah.
Monika, when we were talking earlier, you gave a good example. You were like, what was it, like a restaurant? Hey, do you want to go here? Instead of just saying,
I'd like to go here.
Yeah, I'd like to go here. Yeah. Do you want to go here? I see that all the time with being really confusing with questions that you have, needs that you have, wants that you have. Instead of just voicing them, you going in this really confusing circle, expecting the person to figure out the riddle, and it's just...
Right, because in Minnesota, if you say, do you want to go here? That sort of means I'd like to go there, but I don't want to say it. And so if I ask you and you're on board, then you'll say yes.
Right.
But the other person might not know that, and they might think that you're just really asking and that you don't have a preference and that you really just want to know. So then I'll just answer and say, I'm fine. What about this or what about this? And then they're wanting to caretake you, and you feel like they're not listening to you when really they just don't understand the subtext that you're operating from. Another one I see a lot too is if one spouse asks the other spouse, is something wrong? What's wrong? And the other spouse says nothing.
Yeah.
But there's a hidden expectation of like, I'm telling you nothing, but you're supposed to still know that I mean there is something, and you're supposed to keep probing. And if you don't probe long enough, then I'm going to assume that you don't really care.
Right.
I'm going to be mad at you, and I'm going to know, well, you don't care. And so now I'm just going to withdraw my love from you. And the other person thinks, oh, they just need their space. Okay, I'm not going to push it. I'm just going to give them their space. And they're completely missing each other. And they're wrong. They're both wrong about the other person. And it causes a lot of damage.
Yeah, I can attest to that. Yeah, because Kelly, I know early on in our relationship, Kelly would say something to me, and I wouldn't respond accordingly. And I would do exactly what you just said. I would try to give her space. And then I would see her later on, and she was like, I expected you to at least come and give me a hug or say something and, and confide in me that you understood me or something like that. And I was just like, oh, I thought you were really upset, and I thought you needed some time,
Exactly. And if you grew up in a household where, when mom was pissed, you better not go near her.
Yeah.
You're just doing the right thing by staying away from them. Whereas if you grew up in a household where you didn't get that kind of attunement of you're upset and you need someone to hug you, then that's what you're going to want. And you just miss each other because you have that's what you were saying originally, Kelly, is just that template of experience of growing up is going to have, create this filter through which we see our spouse's actions or lack thereof. And the meaning that we're going to make out of it isn't even spoken. So you have no way of knowing where you've gone south.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And two, men are wired totally different than women. We're wired opposite, right? Mm-hmm. So depending on how you operate in your core energy, a masculine man, right, when he gets angry or triggered, he removes himself from the situation to protect the feminine. And the feminine the female wants to work it out, wants to talk it out, and the man is protecting you from his anger, right? So a lot of times if a man thinks as a woman you're angry, he knows what he would do in that situation. So he's giving you space.
Because that's what he would do, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's learning how the other one works. It's so important.
Yeah.
And then also learning how to give the other person what they need and understanding that, they're not trying to not understand you. It's just you don't have the skills to understand one another. But men and women are wired totally opposite. So a lot of times what we're giving one another is not what the other one necessarily needs. And we both, men and women, need skills to connect.
Yeah, exactly. That reminds me when you were talking too, another way, and this is, we have a couple in the group that has this dynamic where instead of, and it's not just this couple, I've seen this all the time, when one person doesn't want to be honest about what their preferences are or what their limits are or what their boundaries are, and their spouse has asked for something from them, instead of just owning that they don't want to do it or that they're not comfortable or that they're having some resistance or that they're, struggling for some reason or just uncomfortable, instead of saying that, they will argue with the reason why the person has asked for what they've asked for. And it comes across as really invalidating. And it becomes, and then the person receiving that feels like, oh, you're basically saying that what I'm asking for, that it's based on a false assumption or that it's not necessary. And then you've changed the subject. Now you're talking about, is it valid? Is it not valid? Is it necessary? Is it not necessary? And that's not the conversation to be having. The real conversation is, I'm just not comfortable with that right now, maybe later. So when we're not honest with ourselves and we want to deconstruct the other person's request because we don't want to own our own feelings or limits, that causes a lot of friction in marriages. And I think that that's something that almost is invisible to most couples.
Yeah.
It's really hard to detect that.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I know for me, it took me some time to figure out, the nuances of, Kelly and I's relationship around certain dynamics. Like you said, for a long time, I wouldn't hear her when she was saying, I wouldn't hear it the way that she was meaning it. And I would take, so the only thing I could do was put my own spin on it and make meaning out of the only way I knew how, which would, usually turn the situation and made it become more toxic, because, she didn't feel like I wasn't meeting her needs, so, it takes some time. Like you said, you have to develop the skills, especially when, this stuff isn't taught and it's not modeled. So you definitely need that. You have to learn it.
Yeah, it takes time, and our brains are wired to make meaning out of things. We are machines.
Making machines, yeah.
And so we have no choice. All we can bring to the situation is our lenses. Like, there is no objective reality that we can just immediately access. We always have our filters we have to work through. And the best way around that is to be as self-aware as possible, to be able to recognize, this is the story that I'm telling myself about this. Here's what's really going on for me. And the more transparent we can be, the less there's going to be misunderstanding. So, but before we get into solutions, do you guys have any other great examples that we can give people that they can really identify, the people that are listening, to be able to identify, oh, I recognize myself in that, or I recognize my spouse in that? What are some ways that misunderstandings really erode the fabric of our marriage?
One big one is labeling your partner. That's a big one right there. And many times, when you first get together with someone and you're getting to know each other, and you hear each other's stories from childhood, and you know some things about one another, and you start to create your own stories about the other person for later when you need it. And you begin to build this narrative and this story about your partner. And then when the pain that I was talking about earlier begins to come up in you, and your partner responds and gets triggered in the ways that they do, we'll begin to label our partner in different ways. And I hear different labels all the time. And it's really, for example, my partner, is a narcissist. That's one that's thrown around a lot. That I caution people about, because narcissistic personality disorder is like a real serious thing. And a lot of people relegate narcissists to just someone who is, being mean to them or being selfish. And so I caution people not to throw the labels around, or she's a this, or he's a that, and basically when you put a label on your partner, you're like sentencing them like forever, because what you're doing when you label your partner is you're constantly bringing the past into the future, and you're living from that place, and you never move forward or get anywhere if you're staying stuck in the past.
There's nothing more like, you imagine being labeled. That's the biggest thing. The biggest way to misunderstand somebody is to cast them in a role and say, this is who you are. And so everything you say or do, I'm going to see through those lenses. It's like, it's a setup for misunderstanding. How can you feel deeply understood by your spouse if you have that label?
Right. And if you label your partner is going to label you. That's how that works. It's a very childish thing, but it's what we do. And so that's a huge one. This is who they are. This is what they do. And that's the story, and I'm sticking to it. And it's really a toxic dynamic that, you need to cut it out. And it's always going to be bringing the past into the present and living.
And honestly, it feels like a knife in the back when you take, something that you confided in your partner about yourself, and spoken to them about these things that they've experienced. And then when you get angry, you say something, or you relate them to that very thing that they've shared with you. It feels like I said, it feels like somebody's just kind of really digging deep to make you hurt, Yeah. So, it's a sensitive thing.
That's the thing about this, is that it's hurtful. It's really hurtful to feel misunderstood, especially in a negative light. I mean, we're not really talking about being misunderstood in a positive light. We're talking, the assumption is we're talking about I've been misunderstood and I've been cast in a light that doesn't really speak to my true intentions, my positive intentions, and who I am as a person. We feel like the essence of who we are and just our light is not being celebrated when we are cast in that role. And it's incredibly damaging. It's incredibly difficult. How can we have trust if we feel like our spouse has to cast us in this? And like you say, when you label them, they'll label you. It's so important. And as we get into solutions, I'll go into more detail, but you have to be really mindful of what's the secondary gain to staying stuck to this story? What do I get from insisting, oh, this is what they meant. This is who they are. I know them. I know they meant it this way. What do you get from that? Is it just the feeling right? Is it that you need to cling to your limiting beliefs in order to feel sane? Is it that you need to, if you were really to think that wasn't true and keep an open mind, that maybe you've misunderstood, that maybe there's something else at play, that would require painful work, and you're going to have to leave your comfort zone to uncover that.
That's a good one.
That it's important to think about that. So we'll get into that. But I think that labeling is so important. I hadn't even thought of that. And that comes up a lot. And I know I've done this in my marriage too, where I really believe I know exactly what he meant.
Yeah.
And I used to, I don't do this anymore, but I would insist, like, I know this is what you meant. And him say, no, that's not what I meant. No, I know it because blah, 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 blah. And that is so, it's like you're committed to misunderstanding somebody. And if you're with someone that is committed to misunderstanding you got to take a step back and disengage and say, I don't want to spend any more energetic resources on someone who's committed to misunderstanding me. You have to wait until things calm down a little bit, because that's not a good place to be. And how many people spend so much time fighting a false narrative about themselves to their spouse. And then when you take a step back and you realize, you know what, that was just my fear. I wasn't right at all. That was my fear talking. I was afraid that that's what was going on.
Yeah.
That's not really what was going on. So you have to keep an open mind that maybe you're wrong and that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Because again, it's all a story, right? It's like, it's all a narrative that we're making up. And where is the story coming from?
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think is the best advice we could give people? We have a few things here, but in terms of, if we could distill this down to like 3 or 4 things that you could focus on if you and your spouse are really struggling with misunderstanding each other, either you're not feeling understood or your spouse is conveying to you that they don't feel understood. This is sort of like, this is the place to start. What would be the place to start, you guys?
Well, you have to first like catch yourself and really get honest with yourself about, being able to see yourself in these bad patterns and dynamics with your partner. You have to get real with yourself, get honest. That's the first thing, is really just keep it real. If you really want to figure this stuff out, you got to get honest.
Yeah. And I had written that down too, as one of the things, is to be really clear and transparent on what are your intentions in the communication that you're engaging in. Why are you saying what you're saying? And be clear with your spouse. I'm saying this because I'm feeling down and I really just need a hug. Or I'm saying this because I'd like to problem solve a better solution. Or whatever it is, because if you're not clear on your intention and why you're saying what you're saying, there's more room for them to misunderstand what they're supposed to do with that. And then if they don't do the right thing with that, you're on your path to just, having conflict. Yeah. So be as self-aware as you can, obviously. Be really clear on your intentions. And I would say speak from the I always, and separate your feelings from your thinking. Always be really clear on, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. This is what because anytime you're thinking is an interpretation. It's not the same thing as an emotion. And I think where people really get confused is when they conflate the two.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I also agree with you, Monika. And, I know we're making this sound, really simple, because when you're in the heat of the moment, that's the thing I kind of want to bring to awareness also, is that in the heat of the moment, it's hard to do all these things and think about things like this. But the thing is to identify when you do feel like, you're these emotions welling up. That's when you're getting ready to go there. These are the times to kind of really stop yourself, freeze, and think about something before you say it, because that's kind of part of the misunderstanding too, is just when you just blurt out things emotionally, a lot of times that's not clear. It doesn't come from a place of clarity. And a lot of times we're reacting and responding. So I just want people to be aware of that also, because you want to minimize the misunderstandings as much as possible.
Yes.
And that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, like what I agree with you, Ned, when you said freeze. I had written that down too. Slow down.
Yeah.
That's something that we would definitely advise, is slow down. When you start to feel like you're getting confused, like what's going on here, slow down, tune into yourself. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? What meaning am I making? And what do I need to communicate? What do I need to get across? And if you kind of go in that order in your mind, you'll have a little bit more clarity. But
Right.
It's hard when you're in the heat of the moment, but that slowing down gives you that pause between the initial meaning-making reaction and then what you say in response, because that usually happens so fast.
Yeah.
You're not even really aware of it.
Right.
Yeah. And then you're like, gosh, I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, exactly.
A do-over. You always can ask for a do-over. Wait, let's back up. Let's start over. Can I try that again? Like, that's totally fair game, right?
Yeah.
You had also,
and I think that,
no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to go to the next thing in terms of the solution, and this is the biggest one, is you must decide, right? Like, you have to make a decision that you're going to do things differently, that you want to learn how to do things differently, and that you've got to do things that you've never done before. If you want a different result in any area of your life, you have to do things differently. And if you've never done this kind of inner work before, you've not tried everything yet. A lot of people feel stuck in that I've tried everything to fix this dynamic in my marriage. And if you've not addressed your pain yet, if you've not done this inside out work yet, then you haven't done the work.
Exactly.
So you have to make a decision to do things differently, to be a different person.
Yes.
That's the most important thing.
Yes, that's so important. You have to set your intention to be like, I am going to commit myself to being understood, and being very clear, and also seeking to understand, and to make sure that we are not going to be escalating off of a false premise. And once you set your intention and you decide, I'm going to show up differently, I'm going to communicate differently, I'm going to be more self-aware, and then you find that you're still struggling with that, and the intention and the decision wasn't enough to execute it, then you probably will need some support around unraveling the automatic meaning making, and if there's any limiting beliefs underneath that's contributing to the misunderstandings, and also just to learn the tools and the skills for how to communicate authentically and clearly in a way that's really loving, right? Because boundaries get blurred and it veers very quickly into blaming. So if you are struggling with this and you're looking for support around this, or if you just want to explore and really look at, like, where are we getting stuck? What is the nature of why are we not able to hear each other? Why are we not understanding each other? Then we welcome you to book a call with us. You would talk to, one of us, either Ned Kelly or myself, and we would just kind of help you break down and look at what exactly is the problem, identify some steps for you based on your unique circumstances, and just help you get some more clarity around how to apply this in your marriage. And you just have to go to monikahoyt.com/talk. That's Monika Hoyt with a K.com/talk, and book a free call just to explore that. And please, if you have any questions about what we're talking about, or if you know somebody, you can comment in the post below, because this is going to be on Facebook, even though we're in a different platform right now. Go ahead and comment below if you have any questions, and we will go through and answer. And if you know somebody that can benefit from this, share it to them or tag them in it. I think depending on the privacy settings, some people might not be able to get it. But yeah, if you know somebody that could benefit, please spread the word for them to listen to this video as well.
Yeah. And invite them into the group as well. If you're seeing this in the private group, screenshot a name of the private group, send it to your friend, text message, whatever, and tell them to join us.
That's a good point. I forgot to mention that too. I don't think I have that in my welcome, but anybody that's in this group, the Art of Healthy Authentic Marriages, can add people that they think can benefit from the group. They do have to request to join, and then we can approve them in, and we'll see that they've been recommended by someone in the group.
Yeah.
So that's it for today, you guys. I really appreciate you coming on, Ned and Kelly.
Absolutely.
Thank everyone for listening. I look forward to your questions, and we will catch you next week. Have a good rest of the day.
See you guys.
Bye, everyone.